Now we want to gloss it up and make all these glass look all nice and glassy. I mean, you've got potentially all sorts of glosses. I mean, we already talked about the whole clear or, you know, Pledge multi-surface wax floor cleaner. You could use that, but there are other products out there which are sort of a bit more made for these kind of things, like this glass coat Gauzy agent. Right, I'm just opening this up, getting out a paintbrush. I've got a size number 1 here, and because it's nice and thin, we can just dip nicely into our Gauzy agent, right? And, you know, hopefully, because it's nice and thin, we shouldn't really have to like paint, shall we say, too much. We can sort of let it sort of touch and flow around the sides, right? And there we go. I mean, that there should, once it's dried, look all nice and glossy like a glass instrument display panel. That's basically turned off, and we can go around doing all the display panels, the dials, you know, even get inside the cockpit. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 sort of glass bits in here to sort of sort out, and that'll all look nice and glossy. I mean, you can you could even get away with sort of, if you wanted to, I mean, just as like a little tip, if you wanted to go that extra mile, you can get your really tiny heads-up display here, and you could dip it into the Gauzy agent if you wanted to really give it sort of like a nice sort of shine, but I'm not going to bother going down that route, to be fair. I think it's shiny enough. What we want to do now is move along with our canopies. As you can see, I've kept my canopies, you know, nice and protected. I've just put a quick bit of masking tape just on here. It just saves you from doing any sort of possible scratching as you're sort of handling it. There is a nice sort of new tool by Despair. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I did do product review on this lovely tool. When it comes to cutting the tabs off of our canopies here, I mean, this plastic is normally a bit more sort of harder and brittler, so if we came along with some normal sort of clippers, we could end up with just like a bit of it's sort of like a very faint sort of bit of shattering, and it could sort of do some very fine little cracks that sort of go into your clear part, which isn't such a big deal with our normal sort of stirring plastic that we've got, but this is more sort of brittle and hard. But when it comes to this cutter here, basically, because it's virtually like a razor blade on here, what it does is it cuts these off absolutely perfectly. As you can see, it's just cut it nice and sharp. There's no damage to the actual part itself, really sort of nice and easy, and we can just go off, right, and potentially, I don't know, maybe we could come in with a blade and just, you know, just trim that perfectly to size. Make sure it's a nice sort of new blade, not an old one, because you do want to be careful with these canopy parts. I mean, you could come in with a sanding stick if you want to, right, but you know, I do prefer a nice new blade on a scalpel. Just scrape that a bit, nice and careful, right, and that there is now pretty sort of perfect. I've got another one up here, that I cut earlier. There we go. That's looking really nice and good now. What we've also got is we've got our big part of the canopy, but with this big part of the canopy we have got a little seam line that runs just down here. Now what we're going to do, just very sort of quickly, I'm just getting a blade, and you know, this is where we need to sort of be so careful. No heavy-handedness, you know, no going at it and trying to get it all done in one stroke. We just want to get the blade and very lightly run it across this little seam line that we've got. Right, I'm just doing it as carefully as possible. Right, I only want to really be removing this seam line. Right, I mean, you could probably hardly see what I'm scraping off. Right, but I mean, I am scraping some of this plastic off. Right, feel it. Right, and actually, I mean, that feels good enough. I think maybe a little bit more at the back here. Just take that along so slow. Right, feel it. Okay, that feels good now. So coming back to the next part of getting rid of this seam line, it is kind of hard to see, but we have, hopefully you can just sort of see that sort of light mark where we've just scraped that across. Now I'm getting out a very fine spongy sanding stick, but it's a well worn one. Right, this I always keep a really nice well worn one of these, you know, just for basically almost this job. Right, because the more you sand away at these, they sort of wear down and they get finer and finer and finer, so they become a really sort of nice fine sanding stick, which is great for this job. You might want to just like dip it in to some water, right, just so we give it a bit of a wet sand, right, because the wet sand will sort of stop, well, it sort of gives you a bit more of a smoother finish, and that's what this is all about. It's all about just trying to get that smoother finish. Right, now as I'm sanding this, I'm not really sort of digging down. Everything about this is just going nice and light. Right, being careful as I get up to the edges. Right, and then I'm just lightly sanding this. Right, so we've basically at this point, with the blade, with this fine sanding stick, I have now removed our, we've basically removed that seam line. The seam line's gone, but what we've got now is the canopy's looking a bit, you know, sort of rough, not clear. Right, so we basically need to put that clear back into it. So this is where we want to get a sanding stick that has what is a very sort of almost buffing stroke sanding side to it, as well as this really, I mean, if you feel it, it's like almost, it's almost like kind of feeling a car bonnet, you know, really sort of smooth, mega smooth. It's got that sponge to it, so it's got that curvature you can get with it. I got this from where did I get this from now? I think it was Models I Go. They've closed down now, I think, but they're called their Flurry model sanding sticks. Same with this one. Go to any sort of online store and you will find them. Again, let's give it a little bit of a wet sanding, so dipping it into a little bit of water doesn't hurt. Right, and we're going to start to polish this up. Right, this is what this sanding stick is all about. It's all about polishing. Right, we've removed the seam line with our fine sanding stick and the blade, and this buffing stick is going to remove any sort of imperfections that have been left behind by the blade and the sanding stick. Right, now this is potentially, you know, one of those processes where, you know, you're not just gonna be like, boom, you know, there we go, it's all nice and peachy and shiny. You know, it is buffing, and what I've found is when it comes to buffing pretty much anything, you know, you're doing circles and you're doing it for a fairly long time. So just, you know, sit back, relax, keep on sanding at it, right? And then when you're sort of happy with sanding on the green side or the sort of buff side, you know, we come off to this, you know, it's sort of like a super buff side, and this will give you a really nice shine, right? And a good indication that you're sort of really starting to get there is you'll sort of start to hear it start squeaking, right? But the key really is just to keep on buffing, keep on buffing, keep on buffing, you know, and eventually your effort will pay off.